My name is Quinn Harper. I'm 34 years old living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I've always believed that family means unconditional love until the day mine taught me otherwise. It started with a call I almost didn't make. I had just finished work when I dialed home, casually asking, "So when's Felicity's wedding?" There was a pause, then my mother's calm voice. "It already happened last weekend." For a moment, everything froze. My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you mean it already happened?" I asked. Her answer came smooth, too smooth to sound innocent. "It was only for family." The words sank deep like ice, melting straight into my chest. I stood still in my quiet apartment, the hum of the air conditioner louder than her silence. The call ended without goodbye. No reason, no remorse, no trace of the daughter they'd left behind. My thoughts spun. Maybe they forgot. Maybe there was confusion. But no, this wasn't a mistake. This was exclusion, deliberate and clean. I'd sent them money every month, paid their bills when they fell behind, even skipped vacations, so they wouldn't have to worry. Still, when family gathered to celebrate, I wasn't invited. The phone didn't ring again. The silence that followed was colder than anger. Outside my window, the desert sky burned gold over Santa Fe, but inside me, everything went dim. I sat there wondering how love could turn into hierarchy, how blood could feel so distant. And that night, as I stared at the fading light, I made myself a quiet promise: if they thought I was invisible, they were about to find out how visible I could become. If you were in my place, what would you do after that call? I'd really love to know what you think. Maybe it started long before that phone call, long before the silence, the distance, and the words that cut deeper than I expected. It began in the years right after college, when life was supposed to be opening up, but for me, it became a tunnel of responsibility. I took my first job earlier than I wanted just to help my parents. Felicity was still figuring out what she wanted to do, and everyone called her the dreamer. I was the steady one, which really meant the one who pays the bills. Gerald and Nancy were proud of how polite and charming Felicity was. They liked to tell people how beautiful she looked, how smart she sounded, how she could light up any room. When it came to me, their compliments were quieter and smaller, things like Quinn's reliable. It wasn't cruel, but it made me feel invisible. When Felicity needed new clothes for job interviews, Mom and Dad bought her everything she wanted. When her car broke down, they helped her replace it. But when I needed help paying off my student loan, Dad just said, "You'll figure it out. You always do." And I did. I picked up extra hours, skipped nights out with friends, and started sending money home every month. I told myself it was what a good daughter does. When the roof at home leaked after a storm, I transferred $2,000 to Mom without her even asking. She said, "You're such a blessing," but the next week, Felicity got new furniture and a manicure, and Mom posted pictures online saying how proud she was of her girls. Somehow, I wasn't in the photos. I didn't mind at first. I thought maybe that's just what love looked like: quiet, practical, unseen. Felicity called me sometimes, complaining about her job or her boyfriend, and I listened, gave advice, even sent her gas money once when she said she was short this month. She always ended those calls with "You're the best, Quinn," in that tone people use when they don't really mean it, but want to sound grateful. I held on to those words anyway. It was easier than admitting how lonely it felt. There were times I imagined my parents finally realizing everything I'd done for them. I pictured them saying, "We couldn't have managed without you." But when Dad once mentioned the money I'd sent, he smiled and said, "That's what a good daughter should do." That sentence hit harder than I thought it would. It made all my sacrifices feel transactional, not loving. From that day, every transfer I made to their account felt heavier. I started keeping track on a spreadsheet: rent, help, car repairs, health insurance, electricity bills. It was a long list, and each month it grew longer. But the strangest part was how normal it became. Giving, fixing, rescuing, it was my rhythm, my role, my duty. And because I kept doing it, they never asked how I was doing. Nobody noticed when I got sick one winter, when I couldn't afford heating for my apartment, or when my car broke down and I had to take the bus for 2 months. Meanwhile, Felicity posted photos of her weekend trips, spa visits, and dinners with friends. Every time I saw one, I reminded myself she was the favorite. It wasn't jealousy, it was fact. The world had simply been arranged that way. I tried not to resent it. Whenever my paycheck came, I wired part of it home and told myself one day they'll see. But that day never came. Years passed, and the gap between what I gave and what they gave back widened until I could no longer tell if we were still a family or just an unspoken contract. Still, I kept going. I thought if I worked harder, if I gave more, I could earn my place not in their house, but in their hearts. Looking back now, I see how naive that was. Love doesn't need proof, but I spent half my 20s trying to buy it anyway. Felicity got a promotion and bought herself a new car, a shiny silver one with a bow on top. Mom said, "You should be more like her. She's living her life." I smiled through the phone, said I'm happy for her, and went back to my second job that night. I kept telling myself that one day they would understand the meaning behind all the sacrifices I'd made. But deep down, I think I already knew they never would. That's when it hit me. I had been loving my family through action, and they had been measuring my love through obligation. The morning after the call, the air felt different. It was one of those bright Santa Fe mornings, all sunlight and quiet, but my apartment felt like it belonged to someone else. I made coffee, scrolled my phone, and almost wished I hadn't. The truth didn't shout. It arrived quietly. It came in the form of a tagged post on social media, one I wasn't supposed to see. The first image was Felicity in a white lace dress standing beneath an arch of desert flowers. She was smiling, radiant, with Mom and Dad on each side holding her hands. Their faces were glowing, full of pride and joy. The caption read, "A perfect day surrounded by family." Family. That word hit me harder than the photo. My thumb hovered above the screen as I scrolled through the pictures, table set with ivory cloths, smiling guests, the first dance, champagne glasses raised. Everyone was there except me. I recognized cousins, family, friends, even our old neighbor from down the street. Someone had driven 6 hours to attend. I lived only 45 minutes away. I didn't cry. Not yet. My chest just felt tight, like air was being squeezed out from the inside. I opened the next post, a short video of Dad giving a toast. He said, "To my beautiful daughter and her wonderful husband, may your love always remind us what family means." The guests laughed, cheered, and clinked their glasses. I watched it twice, maybe 3 times, hoping I'd misheard. I hadn't. My phone vibrated with a message from an old coworker, Maya, who had known both Felicity and me from school. "You didn't come," she wrote. "Everyone thought you were out of town." I stared at her message, not knowing how to answer. What could I possibly say? I wasn't invited, because I don't count as family anymore. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't type a single word. I turned off my phone and set it face down on the counter. The silence in the apartment grew heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Outside, a bird landed on the windowsill and flew away again, too free to stay in that moment with me. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the blank countertop, the mug of untouched coffee, and my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I thought about how many years I had spent trying to keep that family together, how many holidays I had worked through just to send money home. And now they had built an entire celebration without me, smiling for cameras, pretending I didn't exist. By the time I sat down again, my coffee had gone cold. I reopened the app, not sure why. Maybe I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, anything. But what I felt was distance. The more I looked, the further away everything seemed. Every picture of Felicity laughing looked staged. Every word in their caption sounded rehearsed. They wrote about love, gratitude, and family bonds, but none of it included me. I wasn't angry at them for being happy. I was angry at myself for still caring. Hours later, I deleted the app. My thumb trembled slightly as I pressed confirm. It felt small, but it was something I could control. Without the photos, without the noise, my apartment felt quieter, almost too quiet. I walked to the window, looked out at the wide stretch of desert that surrounded Santa Fe, and for the first time I wondered where I actually belonged. That night I tried to read, but every line blurred into thoughts I didn't want to have. I replayed the call, the photos, the toast. Each detail cut deeper until one question kept repeating in my head. Was I ever really part of this family, or just a placeholder for what they needed until something better came along? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for sure. The people in those photos weren't my people anymore. And maybe they never had been. The days blurred together. Sleep came in fragments, thin and restless, and when morning light crept through the blinds, I felt heavier, not rested. At work, I moved like a shadow through the hallways. Emails piled up, projects waited, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My coworkers noticed the silence, the half-hearted smiles, but no one asked. Maybe they assumed I was busy, or maybe I had gotten too good at pretending. Grief doesn't knock. It just moves in quietly, rearranging the furniture of your life until everything feels slightly out of place. One evening, after everyone had gone home, I stayed late in the office kitchen staring at the vending machine. The hum of the lights was the only sound. That was when Tessa, a colleague from another department, walked in. She had that calm energy that makes people lower their guard without realizing. She didn't ask what was wrong. She simply poured tea, sat across from me, and said, "You can't keep feeding people who starve you emotionally." The sentence hit me harder than anything I had heard in months. It wasn't pity. It was truth, clean and simple. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went home and opened my bank records. Page after page of transfers to my parents' account appeared, stretching back 3 years. Rent help, medical bills, insurance payments, repairs. I added the totals together and stared at the number. It was more than the cost of my car, more than what I had in savings. I realized that nearly half of everything I had earned since my first job had gone back to them. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the realization that they had never once said, "You've done enough." For the first time, I asked myself what I would have if I stopped giving. The thought scared me. Giving had become my identity, my proof of worth. Without it, who was I? I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and I made a decision. It wasn't out of anger, but clarity. I would stop. Completely. The next morning, I drafted an email. It was short, polite, and steady. "Mom, Dad, I need to focus on my own life now. I'll no longer be able to help with the expenses each month. Please understand that this is something I need to do for myself." I read it twice before hitting send. My heart raced as the message left the screen. It felt like dropping a stone into deep water, no splash, just a silent descent. Hours passed with no reply. By the end of the day, my phone vibrated. It was a single message from my father. It read, "Don't forget who paid your tuition." That was it. No greeting, no question, no acknowledgement of the years I had helped. I stared at it for a long time, and then I deleted it. The act felt like cutting a final thread. For the first time in a long while, I noticed the sound of my own breathing. It wasn't shaky or rushed. It was steady. I went to bed early that night, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel what peace might sound like. There were no calls, no notifications, no guilt tugging at the edge of my mind. Only quiet. In the days that followed, the silence from home continued, but it didn't hurt as much as I expected. There was a strange comfort in it. I cooked for myself, bought groceries without calculating what I could send back, and started reading again. It was almost unfamiliar, this act of living without obligation. Tessa stopped by my desk one afternoon and left a small sticky note that said, "Breathe. You did the right thing." I smiled at it, the kind of smile that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't losing a family. Maybe I was finally finding myself. Freedom felt both heavy and light. It didn't come with music or clarity. It came with quiet mornings and long silences that stretched into thought. I started waking up before sunrise, walking through the edge of the desert where Santa Fe's light turned everything gold. The air was thin and sharp, and for the first time I wasn't rushing anywhere. Each step felt uncertain, but mine. I wasn't anyone's daughter's savior or provider in those moments, just Quinn Harper, a woman, learning what it meant to exist for herself. I enrolled in an evening photography class at the community center, something I had always wanted to do, but never justified as useful. The first day felt awkward, sitting among strangers with cameras hanging from their necks like small promises of change. The instructor asked us to take photos that show what stillness feels like. I didn't know what to capture until I pointed the lens at my own reflection in a window. The image came out slightly blurred, the outline of a woman half familiar. Maybe that was the point. That night I met Owen Brooks, a man who sat 2 rows behind me. He was quiet but grounded, the kind of person who spoke only when words were needed. He worked as a software engineer but talked more about light and landscapes than computers. During a break, we found ourselves sitting on the steps outside the classroom. He told me he had once cut ties with his parents after years of trying to earn their approval. Sometimes, he said, looking out at the dim street, you have to stop trying to fix people who benefit from you being broken. I didn't respond right away. His words carried the same weight as Tessa's had, but gentler, as if they understood my hesitation. Over the next few weeks, Owen and I shared quiet routines, coffee after class, conversations about boundaries and self-worth, topics I had never been allowed to explore growing up. He didn't ask for explanations about my past, and I didn't offer any. It was strange how freedom could feel both terrifying and healing, how letting go of duty left space for curiosity. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to town, one with big windows and thin walls that let in laughter from neighbors. There were no reminders of obligation, no unopened bills from home. I rearranged my furniture, bought a plant I would probably forget to water, and felt guilty for how peaceful it all was. Every month when payday came, I looked at my account and didn't send anything to my parents. The guilt came like a tide, strong at first, then fading until I could breathe again. Weeks later, I received a call from Mom. Her voice was softer than usual, almost rehearsed. "Your father's business isn't doing well," she said. The pause that followed was long and heavy, waiting for me to fill it the way I always had. I didn't. I asked how she was, listened to her talk about bills and uncertainty. But I made no promises. When she finally said, "We might need your help soon," I simply replied, "I hope things get better." There was silence on the line, and then she hung up. Afterward, I sat by the window, the same spot where I took my first photograph weeks earlier. The sky was turning pink over the desert. For years, I had mistaken obligation for love and guilt for duty. That night, I realized I didn't owe anyone the pieces of myself I had already given away. I thought of my father's words, my mother's quiet expectations, Felicity's wedding smile, all parts of a life I had outgrown. Owen texted asking if I wanted to join a sunrise photo trip that weekend. I said yes. The word felt simple, unburdened. Maybe freedom wasn't about being free from everyone, it was about choosing who deserved to stand beside you. For the first time, I wasn't saving anyone. I was simply living. The knock came early on a Saturday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the silence before it felt almost protective. When I opened the door, my parents stood on the porch, the desert sun behind them turning their faces pale. They looked smaller than I remembered, but their presence filled the doorway like old ghosts. My father spoke first, his tone urgent, clipped, almost rehearsed. "We need help, Quinn." His voice carried the same authority it always had, the kind that expected compliance, not compassion. Behind them stood Felicity, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word, only stared at me with eyes that had forgotten warmth. I didn't invite them in. For a long moment we stood in silence, the air between us heavy with everything we hadn't said. I could smell dust and faint traces of perfume, familiar scents that used to mean home. "What kind of help?" I asked, finally, my voice quieter than I expected. My father cleared his throat. "The business isn't doing well," he said. "We're falling behind on payments. We thought maybe—" He trailed off, waiting for me to fill in the rest like I always had. My mother looked up, her tone softer but lined with expectation. "We know things ended badly," she said, "but you've always been dependable. Your father's worked so hard." Felicity's gaze didn't waver. She was dressed perfectly, as always, calm and detached, as if this visit wasn't about desperation, but about control. The old version of me would have stepped aside, offered coffee, promised to figure something out. But that version no longer existed. "I only help family," I said evenly, meeting my father's eyes. "And I'm not one of them." The words came out steadier than I felt. My mother's lips parted as if to protest, but no sound came. Felicity blinked once, expressionless, then turned away as if she had already expected this answer. My father's jaw tightened. For a second I thought he might shout, but he didn't. He simply said, "You'll regret this," and walked back toward the car. My mother followed, glancing back only once before the door closed between us. When their car disappeared down the road, I sank onto the couch. My hands were trembling, but not from guilt. Something sharper, cleaner. Relief. For the first time, I hadn't caved. I hadn't become the rescuer they wanted me to be. 2 days later, the storm hit, not from the sky, but from Felicity's Facebook page. A post appeared late that night. "Some people forget their roots once they get a paycheck. Family doesn't mean much when ego takes over." Within hours, mutual friends liked it, commented, shared. Names I hadn't heard in years resurfaced, pretending concern while feeding on the drama. By morning, the post had spread beyond her circle, finding its way into mine. At work, whispers replaced greetings. People fell silent when I entered the break room. Someone left the page open on a computer, and I saw the thread of comments: speculation, pity, judgment. I didn't respond. I wanted to for a moment, wanted to write the truth, to expose everything. But then I remembered Owen's words. "Peace doesn't need defense." The sentence played in my mind like a mantra. He stopped by that evening with 2 cups of coffee and a quiet smile. We sat on the porch as the wind moved through the dry grass. I told him what had happened. He listened, his face calm, his presence steady. "Let them talk," he said. "They're building stories because they lost control of yours." That night, I turned off my phone, deleted the apps that had once dictated my worth, and let silence fill the room again. The world outside could keep its noise. Inside, I was learning the language of stillness, of choosing not to fight battles that no longer belonged to me. Months had passed since that morning at my door, and I hadn't heard from my parents or Felicity. Life had settled into something that felt almost normal. Then one afternoon, while drinking coffee at the local cafe, I overheard 2 women talking near the window. "Did you hear about the Harpers?" one said. "The bank finally took the house." My cup paused halfway to my lips. I didn't move. I didn't need to ask for details. I already knew what kind of letters had come before that final one. I had seen enough overdue notices in my life to recognize the sound of collapse. It didn't end there. Within weeks, word spread that my father's business had shut down completely. Equipment sold, office emptied, debts collected. My mother had tried to hold things together, calling old friends, distant cousins, anyone who might help, but no one did. People remembered the pride, the coldness, the way they had treated others when times were good. When the walls finally caved in, there was no one left to stand beside them. Felicity Harper's name started appearing online again, but not the way it used to. The same social media she had used to shame me now turned against her. Former co-workers accused her of gossiping at work. Screenshots surfaced of her posts, mocking people behind their backs, and the company quietly let her go. Her husband left a month later, filing for divorce after discovering the debts she had hidden. Her once perfect world unraveled thread by thread, not from cruelty, but from the weight of her own choices. I didn't reach out. There were nights when my phone lit up with unknown numbers, messages, unsent words, hovering like ghosts I refused to answer. It wasn't anger that held me back. It was peace. I finally understood that walking away wasn't punishment. It was protection. The person I had been would have driven across town with a check and an apology that wasn't hers to give. But that woman no longer existed. Instead, I began giving in a different way. The money I used to send home now went to a local fund for women starting over after financial or emotional abuse. The first time I signed the donation slip, my hands shook. Not from guilt, but from a strange sense of restoration. Helping strangers who actually wanted help felt cleaner, freer. No manipulation, no expectation, just quiet purpose. Every so often, Santa Fe would remind me of what I'd left behind. One evening, as the wind turned colder, I drove past the old Harper house. The porch light that once burned all night was gone. The windows were boarded, the paint peeling in thin strips. The for sale sign had been replaced by one that read, "Bank Property." I parked across the street for a moment, engine humming softly, headlights dimmed. The air smelled of dust and rain. I remembered laughter once coming from that house, the kind that covered arguments, the kind that wasn't real. I thought of holidays spent pretending, of dinners where silence was heavier than the food on the table. And now, there it was, an empty shell of all those performances. I didn't feel triumph, only quiet understanding. Some endings don't need applause. When I drove away, the rearview mirror caught one last glimpse of the dark house shrinking behind me. The wind swept across the desert, carrying away the dust, the sound of the past. Somewhere inside me, a door closed without a lock. Later that night, Owen called. "You okay?" he asked. I told him yes, and for once, I meant it. He said, "Sometimes justice looks like silence." I smiled at that, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Karma had done its work, not through revenge or confrontation, but through consequence. I didn't need to see their pain to know it existed. I just hoped that somewhere in that silence, they finally saw mine. A year later, my life in Santa Fe had found its rhythm. The mornings began with sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, the smell of coffee drifting through the open window, and the sound of Owen Brooks humming while he watered the plants on the balcony. We shared a small apartment filled with photographs from our weekend trips, desert trails, stormy skies, and the laughter of strangers caught mid-motion. There were no raised voices, no unspoken expectations, only gentle conversations about the future and silence that felt safe. I had learned to love the ordinary. Work was steady. My photography classes had turned into a small side project, and I was finally saving for my own studio. Life had stopped feeling like a test I needed to pass. Then, one afternoon while sorting through emails, a familiar name appeared on the screen, Nancy Harper. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heartbeat slowing in that strange way memory sometimes demands. I clicked. "We lost everything. I hope you're doing well." That was all. No guilt, no request, no apology, just a single sentence, fragile and human. For a long time, I sat there rereading it, trying to feel something sharp, but all that came was stillness. The anger that once burned had long since gone out. What remained was clarity. I moved the cursor, clicked archive, and watched the message disappear from view. Not deleted, just stored away like a closed door I no longer needed to open. Later that week, as the sun dipped behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, I stopped by a small cafe near the plaza to pick up coffee beans. The same cafe where years ago I used to study late after work. The lights were warm and low, and behind the counter stood Felicity Harper. She was wearing a simple black apron, her hair pulled back, her face thinner than I remembered. For a second our eyes met, Recognition flickered quick, uncertain like a candle guttering in wind. I didn't move closer. She turned away, calling an order to the back. I paid for my coffee and left. There was no satisfaction, no sorrow, just distance, clean and final. Walking back through the square, I thought about how strange peace could be. It didn't erase the past. It simply stopped asking for it to change. The city glowed in amber light, the streets alive with music and laughter, and I felt grateful not for what had been lost, but for what had grown in its place. When people ask about forgiveness, they often expect a dramatic gesture, a reunion, a tearful moment, something cinematic. But forgiveness, I've learned, is quieter. It's choosing not to reopen wounds just to prove they existed. It's understanding that some people don't need punishment. They need the distance that allows them to face themselves. Owen once told me, "You don't owe anyone access to your peace." I didn't understand it then. Now I do. Peace isn't granted by others. It's claimed by choosing where you place your energy, your compassion, and your boundaries. For years, I confused love with endurance, loyalty with sacrifice. Now I know that boundaries can be a kind of love too, the kind that protects, instead of pleases. If this story reaches someone standing at that same crossroads, torn between guilt and peace, remember this: sometimes blood isn't thicker than peace. Family can be made of people who respect your silence, not demand your submission. You don't have to prove your kindness by destroying yourself. I often think about the younger version of me, the woman who kept paying, forgiving, explaining. I wish I could tell her that she was enough even when she stopped trying to earn their love. I wish she had known that freedom doesn't mean abandonment. It means choosing truth over illusion. Now when I photograph the desert at dusk, I see what I couldn't before: beauty in emptiness, grace in distance, strength in quiet. The wind carries no judgment, only movement. Peace doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives when you finally stop resisting it. And to you, listening until the end, thank you. If you've ever had to choose peace over family, if you've ever drawn a boundary that cost you love, know that your story matters. Share your thoughts below. Someone somewhere needs to hear that it's okay to walk away.